It's very honored to have you here at St. George's, giving us a talk on this very important topic. So
MashaAllah.
just to let everyone know, this is Ustadh Khalid Hassan. Um, he's a well-known sheikh within London, well-known teacher. He's done studies abroad in Saudi Arabia as well for a number of years, Qassim University, I believe. And now he's here back in the UK. And so yeah, he's qualified a number of topics, and the topic today is about the history of Muslims in Africa, and particularly kind of touching on topics like discrimination and in light of things like BLM that are happening during these times. So without further ado, we'll leave it up to the staff, and if anyone has any questions, we can maybe address them at the end of the talk.
Yes, inshallah ta'ala. Now.
That's fine. Okay, inshallah. Leave it to you.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah ta'ala, I plan to speak about primarily the history of Islam in Africa. And then from there, inshallah ta'ala, I want us to have a holistic viewpoint of Islam in Africa. And obviously Islam is in Africa, Islam is in North Africa, it's in Egypt. But when we say Africa, obviously we generally speaking, what we mean by that is, what is deemed between quotes to be called sub-Saharan Africa, despite, obviously people, of every race living in the Sahara itself, but we'll call it sub-Saharan Africa for the sake of argument. And inshallah ta'ala, we will inshallah ta'ala try to gain a holistic viewpoint of the history of Islam in Africa. From there, we can begin to speak about things such as discrimination and things like that. What is very, very important to understand, and we have to understand this as Muslims, is that hindsight is better than foresight. Hindsight is better than foresight. Hindsight allows you to look back at things in a way in which a person who hasn't had those experiences can speak to them about. And sorry about that. Naam. So right now we need to understand a particular thing, that certain things happen and people live in accordance to the time that they live in, and that we shouldn't judge everything through a Western 21st century prism. We have to understand the thing for what it was at the time and detach our emotions from it. Because if we can't do that, and we can't detach our emotions from it, then we'll be unable to have a rigorous academic view of this particular thing that we're talking about. Having said that, also, I do understand that we're human beings, and it's an impossibility for somebody to be totally impartial. That in of itself is an impossibility. So I'm not trying to say be totally impartial, but what I am trying to say is we need to understand things the way they were. So firstly, Islam. Islam started to spread in Africa in the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin. In the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Uthman. You had the well-known general known as Uqba ibn Nafi'. Uqba ibn Nafi'. Uqba ibn Nafi' went all the way to North Africa and founded the city of Al-Qayrawan. Al-Qayrawan, once upon a time, was a very religious city in Tunisia, Al-Qayrawan. And that's why you get the famous scholar, for example, Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, who wrote his famous book, Al-Risala, which is taught and memorized in North and West Africa. So Al-Qayrawan was where, mashallah, Uqba ibn Nafi' was a city that he, if you like, founded, and Islam began to spread. What we have to understand is that obviously in the beginning, these were, if you like, they're known in Arabic known as futuhat. These were expeditions, futuhat al-Islamiyya. They were the opening of barriers and the conquering of lands, but they weren't and they were done for the cause of da'wah. But obviously, you have to remember da'wah is going to take time. It's going to take centuries. It's not, for example, the 21st century where everyone has an iPhone, everyone has the ability to access the internet and so on and so forth. It's a completely different time. So just because you have a force now, a Muslim government, if you like, that doesn't necessarily mean that the people are going to become Muslim. Anyway, Islam begins to spread. And before it spreads southwards, it spreads northwards. The Muslims go to Andalus. Tariq ibn Ziyad, who was a famous Berber, a famous Berber, who went and took over and sent his ships and went to Al-Andalus, the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal. Okay? They scuttled the ships. They burnt the ships and said, we're never going back. From there, obviously, the well-known story, the Muslims enter Spain. Let's fast forward now 300 years. We have the famous Maliki scholar, Ibn Abd al-Barr al-Andalusi. We should all know this person, Ibn Abd al-Barr. Whoever speaks Arabic and is a student of knowledge knows Ibn Abd al-Barr. Why? Because he was a famous Maliki scholar of hadith and fiqh. Famous scholar. And he wrote the best explanation of the works of Ibn Malik, of Imam Malik, one of the famous 4 Imams. And he wrote his famous book, Al-Istidhkar and Tamheed, which are both explanations of the Muwatta of Imam Malik. And Imam Malik's book, Al-Muwatta, was the first book of hadith. Which took Imam Malik 40 years to compile. And obviously we know that Imam Malik was very close to the time of the Tabi'een, the students of the companions. So Ibn Abd al-Barr al-Andalusi wrote a magnificent book about this. Ibn Abd al-Barr al-Andalusi has a student, and he is known as Abu Imran al-Fasi from the city of Fez, Morocco. Al-Fas, they say in Arabic, Fas. In this country or the West would say Fez. Abu Imran al-Fasi, okay, who was from Fez, taught in the city of Qayrawan. So we're going back. So even though he was from Fas, he was from Morocco, in what's modern day Morocco, he taught in Tunisia. He says, it's going to all go to Black Africa, but just let's listen. Abu Imran al-Fasi is teaching Maliki fiqh. He's teaching Maliki fiqh. Okay? And he comes across a student. Okay? A Berber student, a non-Arab Berber student. And at this time, there was a big distinction between Berber and Arab still. Now, 1,000 years later, the society has swept up and taken everyone. But in that time, there was still a major difference between a Rajul Arabi or a Rajul al-Berber. There was a big difference between a Berber and an Arab in terms of their looks, in terms of their speech, in terms of everything. To the point where even Arabic was used officially, it didn't mean that everybody spoke the Arabic language. He has a student. So we start with Ibn Abd al-Barr al-Andalusi. We then move to Abu Imran al-Fasi, and he has a student, and he has a very strange name. He himself has a strange name, something very strange. His name is Wajjaj. Who's ever heard this name before? Wajjaj. His name is Wajjaj ibn Zallu. These are Berber names. Wajjaj ibn Zallu al-Latami. Wajjaj ibn Zallu al-Latami is a fiery figure, shall we say, who studied fiqh and hadith and Islamic sciences from Abu Imran al-Fasi. Now this is where, as I say in Arabic, marbit al-faras. This is now where the pedal to the metal kind of starts. Wajjaj ibn Zallu has a student known as Abdullah ibn Yasin. And Abdullah ibn Yasin is the founder of the political movement known as Al-Murabitun, the political and Islamic movement sweeping North Africa at the time, sweeping the Berbers in particular. It was a Berber movement at the time, a highly political, heavily religious Islamic movement at the time known as Al-Murabitun. Al-Murabit in the Arabic language means for you to fasten something, rabt, rabata yarbutu, to fasten, to tie. That's one meaning. Another meaning of the word murabit is a troop, a soldier who is standing guard. Someone who is standing guard. Maybe there's a campsite of soldiers, you know, like a Roman legion of soldiers, and this camp, they're sleeping. Just because the people are asleep, there still needs to be soldiers, for example, who are guarding those soldiers who are sleeping. These are known as al-murabit, al-murabitun, the people that they keep in guard. So this group, al-murabitun, they ended up having a government that lasted around 100 years, from the year, 1040. We're talking about, we're using Christian dates here. We're using the Gregorian calendar. So around 1040. So we're talking about 1,000 years ago, more or less, 1,001 years ago. From 1040 to 1147. This is the date. What's the importance of the Murabitun? The Murabitun conquered, or had in their short time, had control of Spain and had control of North Africa, and they began to dive into what is known as today as West Africa. They started to give da'wah and move into West Africa. They stopped the Christian kingdoms from taking over Spain, because already now the Christian kingdoms of Spain are trying to forge an attack. Even though Spain fell, if you like, 400 to 500 years later, already the siege on Spain from the north is trying to attack the Islamic south. Despite, and when I say the Islamic south, everything south of the north of the Christian kingdom, because Spain at one point was under total Islamic dominance, all the way up to France. Then from southern France, which is northern Spain, the Christian, if you like, kingdoms that were left in the northern mountains of Spain started to encroach, and year by year started to take a little bit, until that little bit of land became a lot, until the Muslims only had Granada, southern Spain, and the rest is history, over a cycle of 700 years. So Abdullah bin Yasin was the founder of the Murabitun, and they entered into an area which was known as, or they entered into southeast Mauritania. We all know Mauritania, you know, the Arab country Mauritania. In fact, it's Arab and it has a lot of Africans as well. Mauritania, which is known for the Shinqiti. If anyone knows about the Shinqiti scholars, you know, Shinqiti. We always hear about this. Shinqiti, these scholars of the Shanaqita, these scholars of the Shinqit. These people, the Murabitun, entered into the southwest Mauritania. Okay, and they also entered to the side of southwest Mauritania. You have western Mali. So you have southeastern Mauritania verging into southwest Mali. And at the time, this part of Mali was known as Ghana. See, I know many of us think Ghana, the country, but the country Ghana is not the original Ghana. The name Ghana was the king of Mali. The king of the Malian Empire, his name was, the name given to the king was Ghana. It wasn't the name of a country. Ghana is much lower geographically. It's a coastal city. Mali is a landlocked country in the middle of the Sahara Desert. But the name of the king was known as Ghana at the time. And they gave them da'wah. Da'wah seems to have happened. Were they coerced? Were they forced, or were they given da'wah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. What seems to be apparent is that it must have been through trade and da'wah. The envoys of the Murabitun appear to have, we can't be sure, but it appears that they spoke to the kings of these kingdoms, of these African kingdoms, and they aqna'ahum bil-Islam, yani it made sense to them about this religion, al-Islam. Then we have the famous, what also correlates to these stories, is the famous traveler Al-Bakri. Al-Bakri, who has a crater in the moon named after him, by the way. Al-Bakri was a famous Andalusian explorer, geographer, historian. he writes about this at the same time, you know, the year, what do you call it? You know, the year 1050, 1070, 80, he writes about this, and he writes about the geographical location of these areas. And he speaks about this. And he goes on to say, for example, he goes on to mention the city of Gao, okay, which is southeast of Timbuktu, which is in Mali. And he said that this area is area where the native people are now Muslim. This is 1,000 years ago. He said that the native people are what do you call it, are Muslim. He goes on to mention also the geographical area of Takrur. Takrur is also is Senegal, the Senegal region. And he says that this place is under Muslim control. The people there are Muslim. He goes on to mention the kingdom of Kanem Borno, which is the country of Chad. For those who don't know Chad, Chad is an Arabic-speaking African country in Central Africa. It has Niger to its left, the country Niger, Niger to its left. It has also to its left, what do you call it, Nigeria, northern Nigeria. It has to its right, Sudan, and it has above it, Libya. So it's encased with other Muslim countries, many of them speaking Arabic, and therefore the Chadian people, they themselves, they speak Arabic, okay? They're not part of like the Arab Union or anything like that, but the Chadian people themselves, they speak a lot of Arabic, and there's a lot of Sudani and Libyan tribes who live in the country of Chad, and they're an amazing religious people, and they're known to be warriors. So anyway, he mentions those people, and he also mentions, okay, Hausa territories. The Hausa territories are the tribe of what is known as northern Nigeria, because a lot of people think that Nigeria is one, if you like, homogeneous country. Nigeria is a country which is very divided. You have the south, which is split between Muslim and Christian, predominantly Christian, they say, Allah knows best, but the south has a large Muslim population, probably 40%. Then you have the Christian population. And then you have the north of Nigeria, the north, which is where the Hausa people live, the Bari people live, and the, what do you call it, the Fulani people live, who came in, you know, 400 years ago. And they make up the what is known as the Muslim north. The Muslim north of Nigeria. Maybe many people don't know about this because the majority of Nigerians who live in the UK are not predominantly from these tribes. I happen to be from the Hausa tribe. I'm from the Muslim north, and there's not many of us in the UK. So a lot of people sometimes think that Nigeria is this, if you like, Baptist, is this Pentecostal Christian country, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So he speaks about these Hausa territories, and he names it in this book. This book hasn't been printed, and many Arabic books have not been printed. And this book is known as Kitabul Masalik wal Mamalik, the book of highways and kingdoms. Kitabul Masalik, the book of highways wal Mamalik and kingdoms, okay? And he mentions that in all of these areas, the Hausa kingdoms, Kanem Borno, Mali, Senegal, all these places, and the few countries now that belong to many of these regions, he said that these places have within them paid imams, paid scholars, jurists, fuqaha, paid scholars of fiqh, okay, paid mu'adhinun, paid callers to prayer, and they basically have the, if you like, the skeleton of a Muslim society. This is 1,000 years ago. This is when a time where what we are meant to believe that, you know, Africa, you know, was, you know, people eating people, cannibals, they didn't know what was going on. But we clearly see that in a large geographical area stretching from Senegal and ending at the Sudan, Chad, we see that there is a huge geographical area of people who have a society, people who, what do you call it, have schools, people who are scholars. Now, in order for you to be a scholar in the Arabic language, you need to have mastery of the Arabic language, you need to have mastery of fiqh, you need to have mastery of hadith, you need to have mastery of aqidah, of creed. So there was a level of a society, people were learning another language, there was intermingling, there was trade, okay? So, what we can understand from that is the societies were starting to build them up. And this is 1,000 years ago. Britain there was basically no, if you actually look at the difference between Britain and Africa at the time, or European countries and Africa at the time, there was no difference. They were exactly the same. Okay, these same African countries had armies, had militaries, okay, and there were even educational institutions that we will get to. So you can see that there is a large proportion of land, okay, a large proportion of land, okay, which has been taken over. And from here, from the year, okay, you know, you can call it, if you like, from the year 1040, which is 1,000 years ago, onwards, Islam begins to grow and grow and grow, okay, until different kingdoms begin to appear. You have the Songhai kingdom of Mali, okay, which everyone knows about Mansa Musa. They all talk about this person, Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was only one king of the Songhai kingdom. The Songhai kingdom had many countries within it. It had some parts of Mauritania, some parts of, what do you call it, Mali, all of Mali under its control, some parts of northern Nigeria, some parts of Niger. Had a huge influence, okay? There was a lot of trade going on. The society was very complex. It brought within it many tribes together, primarily the Songhai tribe, which is the, if you like, the paramount tribe of Mali. Then obviously you have other tribes, you know, the Bambara people and other peoples, the Senegalese people and things like that, okay, which are known as the people of Senegal, which are known as the Wolof people and things like that. Okay, so there was huge amounts of progress and education. I'm going to get to the education part of it. You then have, for example, the Hausa people, the Hausa Sultanates who became Muslim. You have kings from around the 1300s, from around the 13th century, okay, which around the 1400s. You start seeing the emergence of huge kingdoms in northern Nigeria. You know, some of the prominent kings becoming, having court, and many Muslims, coming in there. For example, you have the great king known as Muhammad Rumfa. Muhammad Rumfa was a king from northern Nigeria who built his palace in the city of Kano. Kano is a city where I'm ancestrally from. Is a large trading city of northern Nigeria that used to trade with the Arab world. Okay, it was upon an ancient trade route, and one of the greatest, what do you call it, if you like, things, exports of that area was embroidery. The people of Kano, even to this day, are known for their embroidery of long white thobes. They're known as jallabiyas, for example, okay? Long white thobes and hats and things like that. And they are known to be people of the Quran. They were the people that wrote the Quran and things like that. And there was great madaris of that particular area. So you have this king known as Muhammad Rumfa, who brings a Moroccan architect to build him, and this is about 600 years ago, 500 to 600 years ago. You have Muhammad Rumfa who brings a Moroccan architect to build the palace in the way he wanted his palace to look like the kings of Andalus. So he builds a palace that mimics, okay, in the interior, not the exterior, in the interior, because obviously Andalus, Spain, you can't compare Andalus or Spain to, you know, to Kano, Nigeria, but he wants the interior to look like the grand palaces of the sultans of of Nigeria. I mean, of Spain. So this Moroccan architect builds this amazing palace, and Muhammad Rumfa is known. Mashallah, people still talk about him today. So you have great kings like that. You have the Kanem Borno Empire, and mashallah, Islam is starting to spread. Okay, Islam is starting to spread. So you have the Songhai Empire. You have the what do you call it? You have the Kanem Borno Empire. You have the the Hausa empires, and you have many other empires in between. To the point where even in non-Muslim countries like Ghana, you have even pockets of Muslims who are living there. You have one madrasa which seems to hold it all together. You have one huge school, one huge madrasa, which seems to hold the place together, this whole geographical location. Before I even get into that, brothers and sisters, I want us to understand something. This location, at this particular time, and mashallah, we might have a lot of brothers from the Asian subcontinent. A lot of what you see at this time with Africa has striking resemblance to the Asian subcontinent. What do I mean by that? If we look at the primary countries in the Asian subcontinent, you have Bangladesh, you have India, Hindustan, Pakistan, right? And you have other pockets of Muslims in places like in the Himalayan mountains, you have them in Nepal and things like that, right? If we look at, historically speaking, the Asian subcontinent, at that time it was known as Al-Hind, okay, India. Only once the colonial powers go into these countries, when they leave, does it become India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Okay. Prior to that, it was almost like a federal government where it was under one name, it was under one institution, but it was almost federal, i.e., every town, every municipality has kind of the ability to collect taxes and run its own affairs. Africa was like that as well. You didn't have countries known as Ghana, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Gambia, and this didn't exist. The name of this whole place was Sudan, Bilad Sudan. That was the name. Don't let anyone tell you different. That was a fact. That the name of this entire place was known as Bilad Sudan, land of the blacks, land of the people of darker skin. Because in the Arabic language, the word black is aswad, and the plural of that word aswad is Sudan. That's one of the plurals. So you have something aswad, black, Sudan, blacks. It's a plural. So Bilad is Sudan, the land of the people of darker skin. And that's what they referred to themselves, which is why even in the time of the French colonial rule over Mali, it was known as French Sudan. French Sudan. So all these places were known as Bilad Sudan. They were not known to be different, these borders and things like that. So anyway, we have this huge madrasa, this huge university where people all over this kingdom were studying. And this is known as the University of Sankore. The University of Sankore, which is you could say, after Azhar, and maybe even after a few places in Qayrawan and North Africa, is probably the greatest, I would say the top 8 greatest universities in Africa, Islamic places of study historically. And rivals at that time, it could have even rivaled Azhar. Because, number one, it was started by Mansa Musa. And you had different levels. These universities at the time are very similar to the beginnings of these universities are very similar to the beginning of many of these Western universities. The beginning of these Western universities, started as churches. Cambridge, Oxford, they started as religious schools where a priest or something maybe gave a plot of land for the teaching of religion. And from there came, if you like, modern day universities. Such was the case in the Muslim world as well. So the University of Sankore was 3 masajid. You had Sidi Yahya, you had different other mosques, okay, whereby these people began to teach in Al-Islam. They started to teach in Arabic. The mode of teaching was in Arabic. And you had, for example, level 1, which was the Arabic language and the Quran. In order for you to go to this, to go to this school, you had to be a master of the Arabic language and Quran. So the first level of a person who wants to go into this school is he has to learn al-lugha al-arabiyya wal-Quran, the Arabic language and the Quran. From there, you go to al-dirasa al-amma, general studies, where a person would learn grammar, mathematics, geography, history, fiqh and hadith, Islamic jurisprudence and prophetic hadith. And at the end of the ceremony, when you finish this was like the degree program. So you had the foundational level where you learned Quran and Arabic, and then you had, this is known as the University of Sankore. You had the undergraduate program. Like I said, you learned grammar, maths, history. It is said, and it is recorded, okay, in some of the books of history, and you can find books about this particular part known as Tarikh al-Fattash. You have the history of Fattash written by Ibn Mukhtar in Arabic, which I have. Where they record that even the first successful cataract removal was done in the University of Sankore. You have mathematics being taught. There were even rasail, treaties and papers and essays writing about the celestial bodies in the region, even also saying that the planets are round. This is 700-800 years ago. The planets were round and things like that. you also have, what do you call it, the graduation ceremony. The graduation ceremony is the origins of the graduation ceremony in the Western world start in the Muslim world, in Spain, in North Africa, and in West Africa. And what they would do on the graduation ceremony, okay, in the University of Sankore, was that everyone would wear a white turban. And when everyone had finished, they would throw their white turbans in the air. Everyone would take their white turban and throw it in the air, and everyone would catch their white turban. Okay, and this was a sense to show that we are brothers in Islam, we are brothers in mashallah, in religion. And they would throw their turbans in the air and everyone would catch it. The same way today, many people throw their turbans in the air in Western universities. Some of the most famous people to come out of some of these universities were people such as Ahmed, if you like, for example, you have, for example, a Hausa scholar known as, from northern Nigeria, known as, from, if I'm correct, I think he was from Kaduna. I could be incorrect. His name was Den Mesanin. Den Mesanin was a great scholar who was a scholar, an aesthetic, a person of great prayer and great knowledge, who went back to the court and was a judge in the court for the Khalifa of that particular region. You had, for example, Ahmed Baba, shall we say, or Baba, Ahmed Baba, who was a great Malian scholar who in fact wrote some of the first treaties, the first the first essays on the impermissibility of slavery. Okay, Ahmed Baba is one of the first scholars who starts to write about the impermissibility of slavery and how slavery is beginning to pop its head. And this was maybe in the year 900 after Hijrah. So we're talking about the 1400s and the 1500s. You have Ahmed Baba, who was now reading about and writing about the slavery. And he's not talking about the slavery, the transatlantic slavery. He's talking about the Arab slavery from North Africa. And he's saying that it is not permissible for a Muslim to take another Muslim as a slave. It is impermissible for you to do that. And he was talking about them taking slaves from many of these Islamic kingdoms and selling them into bondage. So subhanallah, there was a lot going on, and it's very, very difficult to cover it. If we had 10 lectures, it would be amazing to go through it in totality, but we don't have the time to do that. Now we want to speak about some of the issues today, and I just wanted to give us a holistic view that Islam spread in these areas and took hundreds of years to spread. It was hundreds of years. So I just went through about 500 years, from Zajjaj and his students, Uqba ibn Nafi', all the way to the University of Sankore, which is 500 years. And obviously it's very, very difficult. So now I want to address certain issues, okay? The first one is, why didn't Africa spread to the entire region? And why is it that, for example, there are many Christian people in West Africa? Well, we need to understand a few things. Namely, we need to understand the geography of many of these places. A lot of these places, for example, Mali, Niger, northern Nigeria, and Chad are desert kingdoms. They're desert kingdoms. So it's not the tropics. It's not tropical. It's not a tropical region. So you gave da'wah to people that were around you. You didn't go into an unknown area to give da'wah, especially if the geography is completely different to yours. The further in you move into the coast of West Africa, the more tropical the area begins. And many of those Muslims did not go into those lands and go into those tropical areas because, number one, it was unknown land. They didn't know what was behind that land. And contrary to belief, Africa is not and has never been one, if you like, monolith where everyone lives together. Africa is very divided. Africa is very tribal, and it's very difficult, especially pre-technology, for you to traverse into tropical areas and give da'wah to people that don't speak the same language as you. Another thing we need to understand is we need to understand the size of Africa. China, North Africa, and Europe could fit into Africa, and Africa would still have thousands and thousands of kilometers of empty land. So When I talk about Africa, I'm not talking about East Africa, for example, because East Africa has its own history. They are following the Shafi'i madhab, mashallah, and they have a lot of history. But I wanted to focus on West to, if you like, Central Africa, because that's where a lot of crimes took place historically. But if you look at that, if you look at the western part of Africa to the eastern part of Africa, you are talking about hundreds of thousands of square miles, okay, square kilometers. And people, Africa is very, despite it being a very large landmass, the population density of Africa is very low in comparison to the landmass. So, for example, Hong Kong has tens of millions of people living in there, but it's a very small area. Africa can have the same amount of people living in a much more dispersed environment. So because of that, brothers and sisters, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for us to think that everyone could give dawah to another group of people. It's somewhat an impossibility. Very, very, very difficult. Very difficult for Islam to spread different geographical areas. We also have the language barrier. The other issue was the language barrier. There are so many languages in Africa, and people cannot communicate. And one of the issues you have in Africa to this day is the language barrier. And the language barrier also goes along with ethnic lines. And it's very difficult because every 100, if you like, kilometers, there could be a different language. So you may find in one village an established Muslim community, which has been there for hundreds of years with scholars. You drive down 100 meters and you might meet, for example, animists, okay? There was a unifying factor such as language or something like that in many parts. And those people who were Muslim, those nations that I did mention, did speak languages that were similar to one another, but you didn't find people of complete different language groups, complete different ethnicities in totality, just mixing together like that. That never happened in the history of Africa. Okay, it's very, very difficult for that to happen. Now we look at the issue of slavery. If you look at everything I spoke to, this is all pre-transatlantic slave trade. And one of the mistakes that many of us may make is thinking that the history of Africa began with the slave trade. And the history of Africa categorically does not start with the slave trade. The history of Africa starts before the slave trade. The history of Africa is varied and diverse. So for us to, if you like, pigeonhole the history of Africa and just speak about, slavery and slavery alone, I think would be a big disservice to the history of that region, the Islamic history of that region. As for the history of slavery in that region, then there's approximations that over 30% of the people that were put into bondage went into slavery, transatlantic slavery. Now, many of the kingdoms that I spoke about thus far were not taken, the peoples of those kingdoms were not taken as slaves for a few reasons. For example, primarily, the people didn't live in the coast. So generally speaking, with regards to the transatlantic slave trade, it was the coastal peoples who were taken as slaves. The inland people of the Sahel, the desert, and people that lived more inland were not taken as slaves, primarily because you have a plethora of people who live on the coast. And those people, unfortunately, and it was a great tragedy, were taken as slaves. Whereas the people in the inland, which is where Islam was primarily in that part of Africa, were not taken as slaves. You, for example, the cities of, for example, northern Nigeria and other places, the city had city walls, metal doors out of steel, okay, and iron. You had iron doors, and the city would close at night. The city had walls, and the city would close at around 10 p.m. The city would close, and then after the morning prayers at Fajr, the city would open. And in those cities, for example, in northern Nigeria, Muslims were allowed to live within the city, and non-Muslims had to live outside the city bounds, Sabongari, outside the city, for example. And therefore, it was a protector, it was a form of protection whereby, if you like, pillagers were not allowed to come into the city and breach city walls. Whereas, if you like, the people that were unfortunately taken as slaves were outside of that particular if you like, that particular frame. And unfortunately also, what you had from many of these Muslim kings and many of these Muslim kingdoms was that many of them took slaves because they saw many of the people of the African coast as non-Muslims, and they themselves didn't feel as if they had any allegiance to these people, and they sold them. And that is one of the great mistakes of these Muslims, even some of these African kings, was that they did not give da'wah. And if you look at the time when this happened, you'll find that there was an overall corruption in the Muslim world at that time. The time of, if you like, the 6th century, the 5th century of the great scholars of Islam had gone. And Islam had been, there was inhitat. There was now a corrosion and a corruption that started around the 400 to 500 years ago, which then led to what we're seeing now, the breakdown of Islamic governments, Islamic societies. It started then. The corruption started then. The irreligiosity started then. So, that's what ended up happening. And you find that many people were complicit in this horrible, horrible crime. However, having said that, there were some Muslims who ended up going from, for example, like Fulani people. Some Fulanis were taken as slaves, and Hausas were taken as slaves, and they were taken to Brazil, and they caused some of the biggest slave rebellions in Brazil, and were Muslims and said, we're not going to take this. They fought the Portuguese and burnt down the slave posts, took their ships, and went back to their native homes. So, subhanAllah, this kind of thing, or this idea that Islam or people from the African continent Islam is new here is very foreign to me. I always find it to be very, very funny when, I may introduce myself somewhere, and, it's something that you get used to, but I always used to find it weird where somebody will be like, bro, are you born Muslim? Are you from, are you born Muslim? Where do you come from? Are you born Muslim? And they'll be like, what's your name? And you'll be like, Khalid Zakaria Hassan. And they'll be like, are you born Muslim? But I was like, we as Muslims, your previous names are your father's names. So it's Khalid, son of Zakaria, son of Hassan. What about that is not Muslim? So it was always very, very funny to me where they'll be like, bro, are you born Muslim? Are you Muslim? When did you revert? Did you take Shahada? So that was always very, very funny because I think possibly because of the da'wah of maybe, mashallah, many brothers who come from maybe the Caribbean, or mashallah, many brothers from the African American community who are becoming Muslim, or Muhammad Ali and things like that, who have done a lot of da'wah. Maybe some people forget that the majority of West Africa is Muslim, and the majority of the people of that area are Muslim, and Islam is not new, and maybe because also maybe you have a lot of street gangsters or things like that who are becoming Muslim and they tell their story, it makes a person think that everyone who is, African or something like that, or from West Africa is a revert, and that isn't the case. Then we now get to the issue, the last thing I want to speak about is the issue of Christianity. Why is it that this area of West Africa, which is predominantly Muslim, in fact, majority Muslim, why is it perceived to be Christian? We could say for a few reasons. Number one, the Muslims of that region don't travel to the West as much as the Christians. Now, if you go to France, for example, you'll find that there's a huge Muslim population from West Africa, because French West Africa was a majority Muslim, unlike British West Africa. So, for example, Mali, Senegal, Gambia, and places like that, Burkina Faso, all Ivory Coast, many of them with large Muslim populations were all taken over by the French, and therefore they go to places like France. Whereas if you look at, for example, in this country, you have Kenya, which is not a Muslim majority, despite there being a huge majority of people, of Muslims. You have Kenya, you have, for example, Nigeria, and a lot of the Nigerians, for example, who come to the UK are from the Christian South, even though there's a lot of Muslims in the south as well. So you look at the trade routes, a lot of the Muslims who, for example, who don't move to the west the way, for example, non-Muslims move to the west. Also, what you have to understand also about the colonials is that what the colonials did was they had something known as direct rule, indirect rule. Direct rule was to directly rule upon people who were generally didn't have a religion. So, for example, when the West, when the British took over parts of Africa where the people were maybe animists or something like that, they would convert them to Christianity, and they'll become radical Christians at the same time. So you'll find that majority of Christians of West Africa have not been Christian for more than, I would say, about 160 years. You will not find a Christian of West African ancestry who is Christian for more than 150 to 160 years. It's an impossibility. They have not been. Christianity is very, very new to West Africa. Unlike, for example, in East Africa, for example, in Ethiopia, where it's been there for 2 millennia. Christianity has been there, very old religion. It hasn't been the same in West Africa. In fact, there was more historically Christianity in North Africa than there was in West Africa, Augustine of Hippo and places and people like that. Whereas if you look at, for example, the Christians of today, generally speaking, they were from what, and this is, I'm saying this, I'm not trying to say this as a pejorative at all. I'm actually just talking from a viewpoint of anthropology. Generally speaking, the Christians of West Africa, well, generally speaking, they are from the if you like, the animist, the people who are still animists, who are still following traditional belief. When the West came there, educated them in the English language, taught them English, put them into their schools, and as a byproduct, gave them Christianity. That's what you find with the tribes and the peoples of Ghana, the peoples of some of the peoples of southern Nigeria, some of the peoples of other countries. This is what they did, Kenya and things like that. What they did was they gave those people and those tribes, and the French did it as well. They gave those people the keys to the country when they left after colonialism in the 1950s and 60s. When these countries were leaving, these people were given power, and these people also, they learned English very well, and they had the ability to learn. With the Muslim populations, they were deliberately sidelined. Because those Muslims did not want to take part in this new Western kind of society. They didn't want to take it, and they didn't want to go near it. And that's why you have now movements in Nigeria known as Boko Haram, and Boko means Western education, because when they came into, for example, northern Nigeria, they did something known as indirect rule. You can rule the country, but the emirs, the kings, and of the municipality said that you will not spread Christianity in these regions. You will not spread it. You will take the taxation and you will spend it on what you wish, but we will rule our people the way in which we've been ruling them for hundreds of years, in accordance to Islamic ethics, codes and ethics, which we've been doing for 1,000 years, and we're not going to change that. And that was known as indirect rule. Whereas to the more, the people who had more, if you like, animist beliefs, who didn't believe in anything, then, or they believed in their traditional beliefs, it was much more easier to give them Christianity, which is why I say that Christianity has been in West Africa for maybe 100, 150 years at most in terms of the people. It's not something intergenerational as Muslims. There's no Muslim ethnic group in Africa who was Muslim who then turned to Christianity. It's never happened. You won't find it like that. The same way you won't find it in, you won't find it in India, Pakistan, or any countries like that where Muslims became in high numbers Christian. Simply not the case. So now we move to so if people have any questions on Black Lives Matter, racism, discrimination, how to conquer those things, I would love to answer it in the questions and answers, inshallah ta'ala, because I wanted us to have a holistic viewpoint of Islam in Africa, of Black Africa, and then from there we can speak about, if you like, new age issues. But what I didn't want to do was maybe join in the polemics of the argument and fire up any sides. I want to try to be as impartial and look at what happened from a religious standpoint, because we've only got a short amount of time. If we do have another kind of a lecture together or gathering, maybe we can explore these issues. But I thought it was very, very important to give the Islamic history of the region, which is Senegal to the Sudan, not including Sudan. Sudan in of itself has its own history of the Islam coming in through Egypt, through the Fatimiyya and the Shi'ism that was there and all that before. But if anyone has questions, I would love to answer them, whether it's regarding BLM, whether it's regarding civil rights or anything like that. We can speak about those things, slavery and things like that. Barakallahu feekum. Oh, one thing. In fact, you know what? I'll answer that in the Q&A. And hopefully I haven't, I hope nobody found this boring. I don't normally talk about, if you like, history, even though it's something that I do enjoy as a hobby. But obviously I normally talk about fiqh and things like that. So I do want to extend my apologies if people thought as if this is not what they came to listen to. But I just wanted to just focus on those issues, and inshallah ta'ala, we can speak in the Q&A about other things, inshallah. May Allah forgive me for everything, for all the shortcomings that I've done.
Jazakallah khair. So thank you very much. That was very informative for myself, and hopefully it was informative for everyone else. Yeah, there's such rich history that it's not really talked about much. We kind of assume, yeah, that the main history of Africa is related to slavery, etc. But there's a lot more.
A lot more
deeper things that are really not really explored.
I'm so sorry. Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Is that slavery in Africa was primarily very harsh, wasn't it? You know, what they did in the Americas, you know, take these people onto ships, change their name. We're talking about horrible stuff. But what I do want to say is that slavery has happened throughout human history. But the slavery, obviously, to Africans was particularly fierce. But just because a person may find themselves maybe coming from an ancestry that of maybe were slaves or things like that, nobody should ever feel ashamed of that. Because slavery has happened for thousands of years in all in all cultures. The Slavic people, okay, the word slave, many scholars of language, of the English language say, or of the European language say, that the word slave comes from the word Slav, because the Romans would take Slavic peoples, Eastern Europeans, as slaves because they saw them to be nothing. For example, Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula took other Arabs as slaves. Okay, Bani Israel يذبحون أبنائهم ويستحيون نسائهم وفي ذلك بلاء من ربكم عظيم. That even what do you call it? Bani Israel, the Jews, were slaves. So don't feel as if you're the only person that has been a slave. Many people have been slaves. Okay, it's about what you're going to do with your life right now. What are you going to do with your life? You know, don't worry about the past. It's not about where you started, it's about where you end. And we are all slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now, okay, fathers, I just want to make that clear now, that slavery is not endemic to Africa and Africa only. Now,
yeah, so thank you, Jazakallah khair. So just a couple points before we officially start the Q&A. We have a prize draw that was advertised as well. So if anyone wants to be entered into the prize draw, now's your last chance. The link for that is in the chat. It's a £20 Amazon gift voucher, in case anyone's interested. And yeah, other than that, if anyone has any questions, we can put them in the chat. And yeah, Ustadh can then answer if you can see the chat. If
yeah,
not,
I can see the chat.
Okay, fine.
No, I can see the chat, inshallah. Can everyone still see me? I'm looking at the chat right now. Am I still visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to go down and read a few?
Yeah, you can pick out whichever.
What's okay? All right then, inshallah. Somebody says, for example, how was slavery viewed during the time of the Prophet ﷺ by Arabs, and how did it change in the beginning of Islam? Okay, I think I'm gonna probably just, I think it'll be better if you, Sheikh, read the questions, inshallah, and I'll answer. So you can sift through what you think is better. And obviously, if you feel as if we have any time constraints, we can keep to those. How was slavery viewed in the time from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Slavery at the time from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was rampant. Slavery was rampant. You know, for example, traditionally, when you took over your enemy, you burnt down their village, and you killed their women and children. Basically, slavery was something that was well known. Slavery was well known. There's many slaves in the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You had Arab slaves, you had a lot of Ethiopian slaves, you had people who were Egyptian. You had, it's very, very, one thing about the Arabian Peninsula, which I'll say, is that historically it's been very diverse. Historically, the Arabian Peninsula was very diverse. You had Muhammad bin Maslama, who was of black origin. You have Mughira, who was the wife of Darira, the slave or the servant of Aisha, slave, who was a black man. You have Bilal ibn Barabah, who was a black man. You have Al-Wahshi, who was a black man. You have so many people who were of darker complexion. You had many, many people, okay? You had Abraha, who was going to take over the Kaaba, who was a man from Ethiopian descent. Okay, so you have many, 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 and it was very, very, very diverse at the time, okay? So, how was slavery viewed? I mean, obviously, slavery at the time was a byproduct of war at the time. It was, generally speaking, something that people, obviously, a slave, it wasn't, for example, like a Western slavery where a person's name was chained and things like that. No. Obviously, a slave is a slave. A slave doesn't have the same as they call it, as they say in the definition in fiqh. عجز حكمي يقوم بالإنسان سببه الكفر. يعني it's a bondage which is not physical, but it's a bondage which stops a person from doing things that a free man can do. And slavery was done in Islam. I mean, in the time of Prophet ﷺ, it was conducted a lot, and it was like the slavery of many other regions, perhaps less, but it was not slavery which was, I would say, done racially. That was the difference. Arabs were slaves, non-Arabs were slaves in the Arabian Peninsula, but it was not something that was necessarily on the grounds of a person's ethnicity. And a person, a lot of the time, the Arabian Peninsula, it was much easier for a person to purchase their freedom than than it was in transatlantic slavery. And once you were freed from the slave, once you were no longer a slave, you were no longer a slave. That was it. You weren't called abd, you weren't called slave, or this or that. Once you bought your freedom, you purchased your freedom. That was it. So now.
Okay, thank you, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. So I'll read out the questions to you, and then you can just
go ahead.
So, the next question is, what's the Islamic stance on BLM? Is it something you'd support, and if not, why?
A good question. What's the Islamic stance on BLM? Black Lives Matter. Right. Is it something that we support, and if not, why? Excellent question. I want us to think outside of the box. Let's put away BLM for a moment, and let's look at oppression. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in a hadith Qudsi, and a hadith Qudsi is a hadith where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said it, but it is that he's saying verbatim, word for word, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, which will either say, Fima yurwa anillahi, that which Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam narrated from Allah. It is the saying of Allah, but it's not considered the Quran. It's still a hadith. So this hadith Qudsi, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, narrating from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Ya ibadi, O my slaves, inni haramtu dhulma ala nafsi. I have made oppression haram on myself. وَجَعَلْتُهُ بَيْنَكُمْ مُحَرَّمًا, and I have made it haram between you all, with you all. فَلَا تَظَالَمُوا, so do not oppress. So as a Islamic injunction, as an Islamic ruling, we are against oppression of all kinds. Cannot oppress a person because of their color, You can't oppress a person, even because of their religion. You can't oppress a Christian because they're a Christian. You can't do that. You have to be just to all people. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Umar radiallahu anhu, once Egypt had been taken over by the Muslims, Abdullah, one of Amr ibn As's sons, had a quarrel with an Egyptian. So the Egyptian came all the way to Medina to speak to Umar, and one of Ibn al-As' sons came, and Amr ibn As was the viceroy, was a controller, was the governor of Egypt. So an Egyptian man had an issue with the son of the governor of Egypt. So they came to Umar, and he said, the son of the viceroy of Egypt is causing me hassle. He's making my life difficult. Just because just because his father is running Egypt does not mean that he can oppress me. And Umar said words which most Arabs know today. He said, "Mata ista'badtum an-nas wa waladathum ummahatuhum ahrara." Umar said to this man, even though he said, when did we make these people slaves? When their mothers born them as free men. Meaning that, why are you making a free man? Why are you treating a free man like a slave? And his mother gave birth to him free. Do you understand that? You can't just oppress a person just because your father is a viceroy of Egypt. Can you now come and just treat a man anyway? He's a free man. So if we see indiscriminate killing, if we see people being killed brutally, whether in the hands of police custody or not, whether or not they were criminal in the past or not, whether or not they did this or not, if a person has not gone through any judicial process and is just killed in bare blood through no circumstance of their own, whether or not they're killed through police brutality or other than that, if they are just killed mercilessly for something that they shouldn't have been killed for and are humiliated at the same time, then in Islam we're not about that, because that's oppression. That is oppression. Now the question says, do we have to join a political movement to voice that oppression? We don't have to necessarily join a political movement because of an oppression, okay? You can still aid and still be against oppression without holding or being part of a movement, okay? And this is one thing I want to say to young people, especially as a person who, for A-levels, I studied politics and I was very much into that whole scene. And, I was doing my A-levels at a very turbulent time. The Conservatives came into power and the cuts, and they stopped EMA for students. And it was crazy. It was just very crazy. What I'll say to you is, a grievance, if you have a grievance, you don't necessarily have to join any movement. You can still have that grievance, okay? You don't have to join a particular movement and you can still have a grievance, okay? So that's my particular issue, is that my stance towards Black Lives Matter or any other movement is that they are voicing concerns over what they perceive to be oppression. And if they want to conduct demonstrations and things like that, and they are following these particular things, then obviously, according to the country and the principles of the country and the judicial laws of the country, they're allowed to do that. You as a Muslim, you may have sympathy with what they're doing because of the oppression that they're fighting, but that does not necessitate that you have to, for example, follow them or anything like that. You don't have to do that. And you don't have to prove your Islam to anyone. Just because you're not on the front line demonstrating against something doesn't necessarily mean that you are hating it. I mean, you don't hate it more than others. So that's what I'll just say. That's my opinion. Now, because by you, if you want to, for example, stop and you want to end oppression, you can end oppression in many ways. You can give to charities. You can help, for example, poor Muslims. Poor people in places like Africa and Asia where there's a lot of discrimination happening. You can build wells so they can drink water, or you can even, for example, give to, for example, outreach groups which help people maybe in America and even in the UK of kids that are in gangs and things like that. There's many ways to solve a problem. It doesn't necessarily have to be marching. Do you understand? So now that's all I'll say. I'm sorry if I've gone over the time, brother, by the way. We probably have, so forgive me. You can end this when you like. So don't think that you're forced to, ask questions if you feel as if the time's gone.
No, I think it's been very beneficial so far. We'll answer a few more questions, maybe 10,
Okay.
15, and then
Inshallah, no problem.
Yeah,
I want to extend my apologies again if I have gone over time, but yeah, no.
No, it's been very insightful and very educational for myself, at least. Yeah. So the next question is, does Islam condemn slavery?
Islam condemns slavery. Islam condemns slavery. Islam condemns oppression. But we have to understand something, is that obviously, okay, this is a very good question. People are going to ask, why didn't Islam stop slavery? That's a good thing. Very good question. Okay, let's break things down. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to us about certain things, okay? The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam spoke to us about certain things. So now, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, right, one of the people that will not go through the fitna of the grave is a person who is a shaheed, is a martyr, someone who died fighting a honorable cause, an Islamic cause, according to particular conditions, not just people who bomb themselves or something like that, or suicide bombings, or this crazy stuff that you see. People that really die in a setting that, let's take the companions, a lot of them were shuhada. When the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained why these people will not be punished in their graves, I'm not be punished, they will not go through the trial of the graves, because he said, "Kafa bi bariqati as-suyufi fitna." It was enough that they saw the shades of their sword, the shades of swords. They saw the shades of swords in battle. That was enough of a trial for them to be trialed in their grave again. Now, nobody in today's time fights with swords. Likewise, nobody in today's time brings allows slavery. Slavery is outlawed. Now, for example, the same way Islam calls for the freeing of slaves, for many kafarat, for many expiation of deeds. But the same way Islam does not, Islam was not vocal in, for example, ending in totality slavery, because slavery in Islam was completely different. I think we have to remember that slavery now is a loaded statement, whereby we think of the we think of the transatlantic slavery, and we think that's what slavery is. But that's not the type of slavery that Islam was talking about. Islam did not speak about a slave in Islam, did not have their identity ripped from them. Islam did not, for example, create intergenerational slavery, where if the slave master sleeps with a woman, then that person and all the children are in slavery. That's not what Islam did. Islam, for example, if a slave master slept with a slave girl, then that person, she will become something known as Ummul Walad, father of the child. The children will be born free, and on his deathbed, that woman will become a free woman. Or one of the greatest deeds that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said is to buy a slave girl, free her, marry her, and obviously have children with her. That's one of the greatest deeds. So Islam has always spoken about freeing slaves, but and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, فَكَاتِبُوهُمْ إِنْ عَلِمْتُمْ فِيهِمْ خَيْرًا. Yani, free these slaves. If you see that they're good people, free them. فَكَاتِبُوهُمْ إِنْ عَلِمْتُمْ فِيهِمْ خَيْرًا. If you know that there's good, free them. But Islam, for example, was dealing with the time that the people living with, where slavery as an institution was still going on. Now that the slavery of institution has now disappeared, you do not find in the Quran anything calling for the re-administration of slavery. It's not there at all. So now that slavery is gone, the job has been done. There is no need now. It's not that now, for example, Islam is going to call for the reinstitution of slavery. It's not going to happen. Why? Because number one, slavery only happened in warfare. And slavery was one of the things that happened in warfare. So, for example, why does a person become a slave? If Muslims were to fight another army in battle, then what do you call it? Then generally the winning side of that battle had three choices: al-man, al-qatl, or slavery, or al-riqu bis-sabi or bis-siba, which is basically the scholars of fiqh, of Islamic jurisprudence. Okay, the scholars of fiqh say that the person, the leader of the Muslim world, or the Muslim army, has three choices. Number one, al-man, to forgive everyone who fought. We're talking about the fighters, not the people who didn't fight. The people who didn't fight are left alone. So, for example, the ulama, they say that after a battle, you have to leave the person who's died, who has a maradul muzmin. He's a sickly individual. You can't fight him. He's to be left alone. The women, the children, the old, the ruhban, the priests, the monks, they're all to be left alone. You can't cut down trees. You can't pollute the water. You only simply imprison those people who fought you on the battlefield. Everybody else, they're to be left alone. So anyway, let's say those people now who fought us on the battlefield, what is their fate? Number one, al-men, for the imam of the Muslim ruler to leave them. Al-qatl, if he wants to, maybe, for example, the POWs, prisoners of war, and he feels that they're a danger and they're to be, for example, executed, court-martialed, like, for example, what happened to the leaders of the Nazis on the Nuremberg trials, they were all sentenced to death, that could happen. Or ar-riq, or they're put into bondage, they're put into a form of slavery, servitude, okay? But they're not to be indiscriminately, for example, tortured or things like that. Now that the institution of slavery has now gone, there's no point of reinstating it. Nobody does that. It's not common practice. Islam was talking about it because it was common practice. It's no longer common practice. Do you understand that? It's not common practice. How on earth are people going to administer slavery in the modern day today? It's now gone. So the fact that Islam never called for the reinstitution, there's nothing in the Quran which institutes or calls us to institute people to be slaves. It was something that happened then after battle. Now that these things are done, even if wars are fought now, it's not military practice, it's not government practice, and it hasn't been for hundreds of years for people to just take women and children as slaves. It's gone. So just as Islam never cut it because it was something that happened at the time, even though the slavery was different, it does not call towards its reinstitution. And that's what I have to say about that issue now.
Honestly, that's very good.
Yeah, thank you for the answers. Yeah, again, very yeah, it was a holistic answer, I felt.
Hopefully.
So the next question is, did the African Muslims have any influence on the Hindus? You mentioned this earlier, in embracing Islam. So any African Islamic influence in Hindustan?
I wouldn't say no. I would say that the Muslim, no. The mashallah, the way in which the Indians became Muslim, that's another amazing story. That comes from the Persians. And that's why Urdu is a mixture of Persian, Arabic, and I was very shocked when I heard Urdu, when I hear Urdu, you know. So for example, what do they say? There's a word that they say haqiqatan. There's another word they say what is the word, man? There's a phrase. I was like, subhanallah, that's a pure Arabic term. They say, I forgot it. Not taba'an, there's a word that they say. It's a word, we always say it in Arabic. But anyway, it's a phrase. Anyway, ala kulli hal, akhi. No, they didn't have, Africans didn't have anything to do with thingy. But they'll obviously, you know, if you look historically, in the East African coast, Dar es Salaam, Kenya, the part Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and the other coast, where is it? In the Swahili coast. And when you hear Swahili, Sawahil, it means shore in Arabic. Swahili, okay? And you know, for those who watch Lion King and things like that, Rafiq, friend, a safari, safar, to travel. It's all Arabic words. Swahili is the African language has the highest amount of Arabic vernacular in the language of all African languages. And ala kulli hal, no, they didn't. Islam in India traveled through, you know, the Mughal empires, through through places like the Persians, through Afghanistan and other Persian Muslims, and even people from like the people of like the northern people. So, you know, like Uzbeks, Tajiks, people from Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, all those, that Mongolia region, that very that wide expanse of land where like you have the old Muslims, okay, that are no longer, unfortunately, the athar, or the remnants of those old Muslim places that are now, for example, that were taken over by Russia and things like that. You know, the people were the Indo-China, not Indo-Europeans, the Eurasiatic, the Eurasians, those people who, for example, they might have like a Chinese, maybe eyes, but they have like a European face, you know, the Kazakhstans, Kyrgyzstans, Uzbekistan, and things like that. Those places, there was a huge scholarly influence back in the day, in the old days, Bukhara and places like that. Those places helped spread Islam to the East. And when the Indian Muslims took Islam, they took it very seriously. They took it very, very seriously. And they, mashallah, through time became Muslim as well. To the point where, you know, Ibn Taymiyyah, when he was on trial, okay, when he was on trial for being a heretic, the Muslim scholar who was trialing him was an Indian Muslim, born and raised in India. Born and raised in India. Ibn Taymiyyah had to stand trial in front of an Indian judge. Okay, so na'am. No, Islam has been it's been in India for a very long time, and there hasn't been there wasn't really that much what do you call it, that much interaction. Now,
okay, thank you for that answer. So we'll stick to two more questions.
Excellent, no problem.
So second to last question is, can you be racist to white people, or because they have not been oppressed, racism wouldn't exist towards them?
No, ya akhi al-kareem, you can't be racist towards white people, brother. We need to understand something. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us all. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. We have made tribes and nations to know one another. We have to understand this, brother. Many societies what do you call it? Many societies, past and present, have had racist elements within them. Okay, many societies have had past and present elements within them. So, for example, if you look at Bani Israel, the children of Israel, many of the prophets were killed by their own people. When you look at the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the people who caused him the most harm, who injured him, who cracked his tooth, who put the entrails of camels on him and tortured him in a way in which he had never been tortured, had been from his own people. His own people. But then, for example, look at the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he sent Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, if I'm correct, no, it wasn't Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. It was Ali bin Abi Talib, and it was either Abu Musa al-Ash'ari or another Sahabi, when he sent them to Yemen, which was a southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. He said, you're going to a people that they're Ahlul Kitab, they're Jews and they're Christians, okay? Tell them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. إذا قبلوا ذلك يعني اعلموا أو فعلمهم أن الله سبحانه وتعالى افترض عليهم الصلاة. If they accept that, then tell them that Allah has made them, has given them the prayer to pray. And if they accept that, then tell them that there's a zakat. And if they accept that, look at how one group of people, the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, accepted Islam with no fighting. But look at the Meccans, how they were, subhanallah, they were so, they were rigorous and harsh and beleaguered the Muslims. And that was the Prophet's own people. So as Muslims, we're not here to hold people for the sins of their forefathers. You can't say that. We have to accept also that society has changed, society is not society now is not, we're not living in the 1800s where or we're not living at places where, for example, people are being if you like hanged for their ethnicity. So in reality, akhi al-kareem, we should not have any hatred towards any ethnic group, whether it's white people, whether it's Europeans, whether it's Americans, whether it's Africans, whether it's Asian. We should not have that to any people, because if you start harboring feelings towards a particular ethnic group, that's going to cloud your judgment. And as a Muslim, you can't allow that to happen. Also, as a Muslim, you should want for your brother what you want for yourself. You should want English people to become Muslim. You should want French people to become Muslim. You should want Spanish people to become Muslim. You should want Italians to become Muslim. The same way you want people from South America to be Muslim. You want everyone to be Muslim. You want people to know this blessing that we have. So we shouldn't harbor anger towards white people. We shouldn't harbor anger towards any ethnic group. That doesn't mean now you don't obviously speak about some of the crimes that were committed in humanity. But as the Arab poet Al-Hariri said, who wrote his famous book, Maqamat al-Hariri, his famous book is Maqamat, the famous book of Arabic prose. He said, Man dha alladhi ma sa'a qat, wa man lahu husna faqat. Man dha alladhi ma sa'a qat, wa man lahu husna faqat. Give me a person. Who is a person? Ma sa'a qat. He's never done anything bad in his life. And then he said, bring me a person. Wa man dha alladhi husna faqat. And bring me a person there. His entire life is goodness. You can't find it. People have a good side, people have a bad side. People commit sins, people don't commit sins. Adam Adam's children, his brother murdered his brother. And this is Bani Adam. Bani Adam, we have been created as people who, some of us may commit crimes against others, oppress others. But this doesn't mean now that we target and we say, oh, European people are bad. All English people are racist. All white people are racist. We don't do that at all. We don't do that at all. Okay, now. So now.
Final question. So the question, I think, is from South Asian descent, and they've said, can you ask how we can educate our parents and families about Black Muslims, as they can be ignorant?
I'll say this. Look, okay. I wouldn't say to you to go to, let's say this, for example. Look, my mother is, the way, for example, somebody says here that, now I'm talking from I can't talk from for example, an African-American experience, and I can't talk from a Caribbean experience. I can only talk as a Muslim who is ancestrally Muslim for an African experience. Now, we don't really, just like any other group, we don't really care for acceptance from anyone. We are who we are. You kind of understand what I'm trying to say? We're not, generally speaking, people who feel the need to be, if you like, how can I say this? We're not looking for nobody's approval kind of thing. So the same way, for example, and I'm being very honest, for example, we have, many of us, from Asia, from Africa, a lot of us come from maybe rural areas back home. For example, my mother was born on a farm. My mother was born on a farm in Niger. Her father came from southern Libya and settled in Niger, and she was born on a farm there. My mother lived she lived like the life of a person who lived in the village. There wasn't any formal school. There wasn't. So my mother, for example, she knows that, for example, Indians and Bangladeshi, they're Muslim, but she doesn't know about the kings or for example, the Mughal Empire and the wars between the Muslims and the Maharaja. She doesn't know anything about that. She doesn't know anything about that. And it's beyond her scope to even know about that. My mum is just a miskeen Muslim lady who just prays her salawat and believes in Allah, and that's it. So right now, if you've got, for example, a Pakistani mother, Indian mother, Bangladeshi mother, she's just a miskeen lady. She just prays her salah. She goes home. Yeah, I don't see a need to educate someone who isn't doing anything. Now, let's say, for example, some of them may have some beliefs which are not the best. All you do is, you don't have to say, did you know that in Africa, there were Greek schools? Did you know that in Africa there were these scholars? Did you know that that Islam spread into Africa through Muslim Spain? You don't have to say all of that. You just say, look, Mum, in Islam, we have to treat all people nicely. We have to treat all people equally. And it's not good that we say certain things about other people. Assalamu alaikum, best. That's it. We don't have to go into now the polemics of slavery and this, and they were taken in chains. Some people don't understand that. This is another thing. The same way we want people to understand our grievances, we have to understand the other side. That's another important thing. We have to understand that our parents, they don't know this history. They're not from the Western world. The Eastern Hemisphere, Africa, they're thinking about their own problems. They're not thinking about slavery, for example. They have their own mentality. So it will be unfair for us to enforce upon them something that they don't know nothing about. That doesn't mean we don't educate them, but you can't force someone who does not see the world from your prism and is incapable of seeing the world from your prism to now understand the world through their prism. If I was to bring now a 60-year-old person, member of the Chinese Communist Party, who's not a Muslim, who doesn't have a religion, and sees everything from a communist viewpoint, it would be unfair for me to judge his view on the world because he doesn't see it from a Western liberal standpoint. This person grew up in China, lived in China. He's only known the Communist Party. He's been the information that has been told him. He's been censored. He hasn't been allowed to read certain things. His language doesn't permit him to understand other cultures. He lives in a social culture where it's only one culture. It's not a multicultural society. There's not different people. It's all. For example, there's a lot of it's a one monolith. It would be wrong for me to say to this person, why don't you understand me? Because he's coming from a particular prism. So right now, when it comes to teaching our parents, All we have to do is teach within them to teach. All we have to do is teach everyone, treat everyone equally, treat somebody the way you want to be treated. Don't oppress and don't make generalizations about people, and that's it. But we don't need to now start screaming at them and telling them that, because we can't make someone who has not experienced and lived and comes from a different culture, we can't make them understand other cultures. It's an impossibility. It's an impossibility. So what I would say is, teach them Islam, make them practice Islam, authentic Islam. Okay, try to teach them Islam to the and inshallah ta'ala, Islam will control their behavior. But it's wrong for us to think that we are going to rid the world of racism. Racists, bigots, and I'm not talking about Asian parents now, or any ethnic group, African parents, Arab parents. I'm just talking about the world. There will always be warmongers. There will always be racial superiorists, whatever you want to call them, people who's racist supremacists who think that they're better than everybody else. There will always be people who want to commit bloodshed. These people will always exist in the world. They existed before and they existed now. I mean, they existed before, they will exist now, and they'll exist in the future. We try to give da'wah and talk to people who want to understand the truth. And if they don't want to understand the truth, we leave it to them. And that's all I have to say, inshallah ta'ala, for this. And thank you very much, Akhil Kareem, for this event. May Allah reward you abundantly.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much.
That
was very beneficial.
It's fine, alhamdulillah.
The main talk, the history talk, and talk on discrimination, and also some very good questions that came through as well. Apologies if we weren't able to get through all the questions. There were actually quite a few.
That's fine. Barakallahu feek, Sheikh. I'm going to have to leave, and I'm very sorry. It was beautiful talking with you all. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in everything that you do. Barakallahu feekum, Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam. Just for everyone remaining, we're just going to announce